Darkness has many homes, but some places it never leaves. Across the world, there are stories whispered in fear, places people avoid after sunset, and histories written not in ink, but in blood. Tonight, we open the doors to 3 of them. Each tale carries one truth: the past doesn't stay buried. It waits, watching. Welcome to Horror Diaries, where every story is real and every whisper is true. Relax and turn off the lights as we delve in. Before we start, please press the subscribe button and like this video. Also, where are from and what time are you watching? 3 disturbing true stories of haunted places, cursed souls, and horrors that refuse to die. 1. The Edinburgh Vaults. Beneath the streets of Edinburgh lies another world. A world the living were never meant to find. When tourists stroll the Royal Mile, they walk over history, but also over the bones of those who never saw daylight again. For more than a century, the city kept a secret buried under its own feet. A maze of stone tunnels and vaults so dark, so airless, that even rats refused to stay. They called it the South Bridge Vaults, but locals called it the City of the Dead. It began innocently enough, a grand bridge built to unite Edinburgh's old and new towns in the 18th century. Dozens of chambers were carved beneath it, storage rooms, workshops, merchant cellars. But as the years passed, the city above forgot what it had built below. Moisture seeped in, fires burned, businesses left, and what remained became a home for those with nowhere else to go. The poor, the desperate, the outcast, and in their shadows others came: smugglers, thieves, murderers, and men who sold bodies for science and sometimes just for fun. When the vaults were finally sealed in the mid-1800s, it wasn't to preserve history, it was to bury it. But nothing stays buried forever. 200 years later, construction workers would open a passage by mistake, and what they found inside would silence even the bravest among them. Bone fragments, rusty chains, and something else in a circle of stones and blackened by fire. No one claimed it, no one could explain it. But the locals whispered, some doors should never have been opened again. Tonight, we go beneath the City of the Dead, where crimes were hidden, rituals performed, and whispers of the damned still echo through the stones. Welcome to the Edinburgh Vaults. In the late 18th century, Edinburgh was a city divided. The old town packed tight and crumbling under centuries of history, and the new town, freshly built for the wealthy, stretching toward a brighter future. To connect them, the city's engineers envisioned something grand, a bridge unlike any other, rising above the crowded streets and linking the living past with the hopeful present. It would be called South Bridge. 15 arches of solid stone towering over the cowgate below. But what few noticed as the bridge took shape were the hollow spaces left within its foundations. Dozens of chambers, hidden vaults, perfect for storage or something darker. At first, the vaults were meant for commerce. Shops, taverns, tradesmen storing their wares. The upper levels thrived with life and laughter, but beneath the surface, things were never quite right. Moisture from the river seeped through the walls. Air grew thick and cold. Fires burned low and voices began to echo in ways that felt unnatural, like the vaults themselves were listening. Merchants soon abandoned the lower chambers. The dampness ruined their goods and the smell of decay never quite left. But others, less honest, saw opportunity. When the last tradesman left, the city's shadows moved in. The poor and the desperate found shelter where the light no longer reached. Families built homes from scraps of wood and rags. Fires burned in alcoves and the air filled with the sounds of coughing and crying. By 1795, the vaults had become Edinburgh's underworld, a city beneath a city. By the early 1800s, the vaults were alive, but with a different kind of life. Beggars and thieves shared the same narrow tunnels. Brothels and gambling dens grew in the shadows. And on certain nights, if you listened carefully, you could hear faint singing, followed by screams that no one above ever heard. The city above carried on. Markets opened, churches rang their bells, and no one spoke of what was happening beneath their feet. But word began to spread. People vanished into the vaults and never came back. Merchants whispered of strange figures seen at night, dragging sacks through alleys, their faces covered in soot. And as the years turned to decades, the vaults began to take on a life of their own, feeding on fear and waiting for darker visitors still to come. The bridge was built to unite the city, but all it truly did was bury its sins. Beneath the cobblestones of Edinburgh, the air was always damp, heavy with the scent of smoke, rot, and humanity. The year was 1805, and by then, The vaults were no longer a secret, at least not to the poor souls who had nowhere else to go. Entire families lived in darkness. Mothers nursed their children beside open fires that gave more smoke than warmth. Men scavenged in the markets above, stealing food or selling scraps just to survive another night. Down here, sunlight was a memory. The walls dripped constantly, the floors turned to mud, and rats were often the first to greet newcomers. Children learned to crawl over broken glass and stone before they ever learned to walk. The people called this place home, but they also called it the underworld. The city above did not care. As long as the poor stayed out of sight, Edinburgh remained proud, polished, and proper. But what they buried beneath, what they chose to forget, festered. Soon, sickness began to spread. The stench of waste and decay clung to the air, and coughing echoed through every archway. Fires burned all night to keep the cold away, but they only made the air more poisonous. No doctors came here, no priests dared visit. Those who died below were carried out quietly and buried without names. The vaults became their grave, their final address on the city's census of the damned. And yet not everyone who lived there was innocent. Among the desperate came the cruel. The shadows beneath South Bridge became a perfect hiding place for those with darker appetites. Thieves worked the alleys by night, then vanished underground before the city guard could find them. Criminals built small kingdoms down here, taverns that served more blood than ale, rooms where debts were paid in flesh. Sometimes screams echoed through the tunnels. The poor learned not to ask where they came from. They simply whispered prayers to God or whoever would listen, and hoped the noise moved on. But there were other sounds too, stranger ones, a steady rhythm that came from the walls themselves. And no matter how many times they searched, no one ever found the source. Some said it was water, some said it was the dead, but most just stopped listening. The poorest of the poor slept with open eyes, and every candle flame was watched like a heartbeat, for if it went out, you might not wake up again. Still they stayed, because down there, even in the filth, there was something the city above would never give them: belonging. Everyone who entered the vaults belonged to them now. The bridge above was for the living. The vaults below were for everyone else. And as Edinburgh grew richer, the darkness below grew hungrier. Because the city did not know it yet, but its own nightmares were just beginning. By the early 1820s, the vaults were no longer a refuge for the poor. They had become something else entirely, a kingdom of shadows beneath the city of light. Up above, Edinburgh glittered with gas lamps and fine parlors, but beneath those cobblestones the air was thick with crime. The vaults, forgotten by the council and abandoned by the merchants, had found new masters: smugglers, thieves, gamblers, and killers. They moved like ghosts, unseen by the world above. Their footsteps echoed in secret corridors, their whispers carried through stone like confessions. Money passed from hand to hand, stolen goods changed owners, and blood was spilled when debts went unpaid. The South Bridge vaults had become a marketplace for sin. In one chamber, a tavern burned candles through the night, its air thick with whiskey, sweat, and smoke. Men gambled there until dawn, playing with coins they'd stolen or lives they'd soon take. In another, prostitutes worked by candlelight, their laughter masking the screams that sometimes followed. The police above rarely entered. When they did, they never came alone, and they never stayed long. The vaults twisted in ways that made men lose their bearings. A wrong turn could lead to a wall where a hallway should be, a door that vanished once closed, or a passage that led to nothing but silence. Criminals said the vaults had moods, that some nights the air turned heavy and made it hard to breathe. On those nights, even the boldest men refused to go deep. They said the tunnels whispered names, sometimes their own. In time, the vaults became known among the city's underworld as the belly. Everything unwanted ended up there: bodies, secrets, truths too dark for daylight. Smugglers carried barrels of stolen whiskey through the tunnels, moving unseen from one end of the city to the other. Fences sold stolen jewelry to men who'd never ask questions. Even doctors came, desperate for specimens they couldn't obtain legally. The vaults had become a bridge not just between two sides of the city, but between the living and the dead. People disappeared here. Some were killed over debts. Others were taken for reasons no one dared say aloud. And when screams echoed through the chambers, the city above slept peacefully, never knowing how close its nightmares were. The poor who still lived there knew the rules. When footsteps approached, blow out your candle. When someone knocked, never answer. And when you heard your name whispered in the dark, run, because whatever was calling it wasn't human anymore. Yet even the criminals, those who had long since stopped believing in God or ghost, spoke of a presence deeper within the vaults, a room no one claimed, a place where the air itself felt alive. They said it was cursed, that men who entered alone never came back, and those who did were never the same. They spoke of symbols on the walls, carved deep into the stone, older than the bridge itself. Circles, marks, and strange words no one understood. Some said it was the work of witches. Others said the vaults were trying to speak. But the truth was darker still, because the vaults had begun to attract not just the lost and the wicked, but those who sought power in things no human should ever touch. And in their rituals, the vaults found something new to feed on: faith. Twisted, corrupted, and eager to be heard. By the year 1827, Edinburgh had become the medical capital of Britain. Its universities drew students from across Europe, eager to learn anatomy, surgery, and the secrets of the human body. But there was one problem. To study anatomy, one needed corpses, and the law allowed only those of executed criminals to be used. There were never enough. That's when men like William Burke and William Hare saw opportunity in death. They were not doctors, not scholars, just two Irish laborers who shared a rooming house and a growing hunger for money. Their story began as all evil does, quietly. A tenant in Hare's lodging house died owing rent. Rather than lose the money, the men decided to sell the body. They carried it through the streets under cover of night to the back door of the University of Edinburgh. There they met Dr. Robert Knox, a respected anatomist who paid them £7 and 10 shillings for the corpse. No questions asked. Burke and Hare realized something at that moment. A body was worth more than a life, so they stopped waiting for people to die. Over the next year, 16 people would vanish into the shadows of Edinburgh. Poor, lonely, forgotten souls. Lodgers. Prostitutes and drunkards. Each one lured with drink, strangled in silence, and sold to the doctors who never asked where the bodies came from. Some of those victims, it said, were taken from the vaults themselves. Men and women who lived in the darkness. Unseen, unmissed, and easily erased. Burke and Hare used the city's labyrinth of closes and tunnels to move unseen. The vaults became their hunting ground, a perfect place to hide the evidence until night fell. When the murders were finally uncovered, the city reeled in horror. The trial that followed became one of the most infamous in British history. Hare was granted immunity for turning on his partner. Burke was hanged, and in a grim twist of justice, his body was given to the medical school for dissection. The public cheered. For the people of Edinburgh lingered. The line between science and murder had been broken, and the vaults, once just a refuge for the poor, were now whispered to be cursed by the blood of the body snatchers. Even decades later, workers who dared enter the deeper chambers spoke of strange marks on the walls, small impressions that looked like human hands, pressed into the stone. They said they appeared near the spots where Burke and Hare once hid their victims. No one ever proved it, but everyone believed it. The vaults had absorbed their crimes, and with them a hunger for the human soul. From that day forward, no one entered the lower tunnels alone. Because the footsteps you heard down there might not be yours. By the mid-1800s, the vaults had fallen completely silent. The merchants were gone, the poor had fled. Even the criminals had moved on to safer shadows. What remained beneath South Bridge was nothing but darkness, cold, heavy, and waiting. But nature hates a void, and in that emptiness something else crept in. The whispers began quietly. Stories of candles burning behind sealed doors, of chanting echoing through the tunnels long after midnight. At first, people thought it was just superstition, tales told by drunks and grave robbers. But then the city watch began finding strange signs scratched into the walls, circles, runes, and symbols that no one could read. Melted wax pooled on the stone floors. The smell of burnt herbs and something fouler, iron and ash, hung in the air. Those who dared to enter said the air itself felt alive. Breathing, watching. By the late 1800s, the vaults had become a gathering place for the occult. Witch covens, spiritualists, and self-proclaimed magicians held secret meetings there, drawn by the darkness and the stories of the restless dead. Some came seeking contact with spirits, others came for power. They claimed the vaults were built on ancient ground, a crossing point between worlds, a place where the veil between life and death was paper thin. Locals spoke of rituals performed by candlelight, of blood offerings and circles of salt. And they said, If you listened closely, you could still hear the echoes of those rites long after they'd gone. One chamber in particular earned a reputation for evil, a room so black that no torch could fully chase the darkness away. They called it the Room of the Watcher. It's said a coven once performed a ritual there to summon a guardian spirit. But what they brought forth wasn't a guardian at all. Witnesses described a shape that moved without sound, a shadow darker than the dark with eyes that glowed like embers in the void. They fled the vaults that night, leaving their candles burning and their circle unbroken. The next morning when they returned, they found the candles still burning. But the chalk circle had been smeared, and on the wall a single word had been carved deep into the stone. Stay. No one ever used that chamber again. Over the years, others tried to explain it away. Chemical reactions, drafts, tricks of the mind. But the stories persisted. Tour guides would later refuse to linger there, and paranormal investigators claimed that every recording captured in that room contained whispers beneath their voices, words in no known language. Even today, the vaults are used for ghost tours and historical walks. But no one stays past midnight. Because long after the tourists are gone and the lights are turned off, something still moves in the darkness. Some say it's the echo of the old rituals. Others say it's the spirit the coven left behind. But the guides, they have another name for it. They call it the Watcher in the Vaults. By the turn of the 20th century, Edinburgh wanted nothing more to do with its underworld. The South Bridge Vaults had become an open wound beneath the city, a reminder of poverty, crime, and the whispered evil that had once thrived there. So the city sealed them. Bricks were laid across entrances, archways filled with rubble, and the vaults were buried beneath new layers of stone and concrete. For a time it seemed that darkness had been conquered, but the vaults were not silent. In 1923, heavy rains fell on Edinburgh for 9 straight days. The River Cowgate overflowed, flooding the lower city and seeping into the buried tunnels beneath South Bridge. When workers were sent to inspect the damage, they found chambers that hadn't been opened in nearly a century. The air was foul, thick with rot and a strange metallic taste. In the flickering lantern light, they saw water rising slowly across the floors and floating within it. Bones. Hundreds of them human bones. Some ancient, blackened by age, others disturbingly new. No one could explain where they'd come from. The official report called it historic debris, but the workers refused to go back. They said the vaults didn't want to be disturbed. Those who entered complained of nausea, of feeling watched, and of sudden violent headaches that vanished the moment they stepped outside. One man, a laborer named Thomas Greer, claimed that while he was draining one of the chambers, something grabbed his ankle beneath the water. He screamed, thinking it was a rat, but when he looked down, he saw the outline of a hand, pale, thin, and impossibly long. It vanished when his lantern fell, but Thomas refused to return. He quit the next day. Word spread quickly through the city. The vaults were cursed. Every attempt to drain or repurpose them ended in accidents, collapses, sudden equipment failures, men injured by falling stones. And so the city sealed them again, this time for good. But the flood had awakened something, and it had reminded Edinburgh that beneath its grand streets and shining spires, a darker city still breathed. Years later, when archaeologists reopened parts of the vaults for historical study, they found the flood's traces still there. Black silt, broken bottles, bones fused to the walls. One chamber, however, stood untouched, dry, preserved as though the flood had flowed around it. No one could explain why. But carved above its doorway, hidden under layers of soot, was a single marking, a circle intersected by 2 lines. The same symbol found in records of 19th century occult rituals. The flood had come and gone, but the vaults had chosen what to keep. For more than a century, the Edinburgh Vaults remained sealed, forgotten, their entrances hidden behind walls and shop basements, their stories whispered only by those who remembered. But time has a way of unearthing what the living try to bury. In the 1980s, during renovation work on the South Bridge area, builders broke through a thick stone wall and found themselves staring into a dark, airless chamber. It was small, damp, silent, but beyond it, a tunnel stretched away into the black, lined with ancient brickwork and the scent of centuries. They had rediscovered the vaults. News spread quickly. Archaeologists, historians, and the curious began to descend the stairways that hadn't seen light since the Victorian era. What they found was both fascinating and horrifying. The vaults were perfectly preserved in parts. Rooms still contained remnants of 18th century life. Rusted tools, shattered pottery, wine bottles sealed with wax. But alongside them were signs of something darker. Animal bones arranged in circles, candles melted into symbols, and stains on the floor that refused to wash away. It was as if the past had been waiting for them. Dr. John Andrew Henderson, one of the first modern researchers to enter, later wrote that the air felt thick, as though it had been holding its breath for 100 years. Even seasoned workers refused to go too deep. They reported sudden temperature drops, footsteps echoing behind them, and voices whispering names they never spoke aloud. One man, a surveyor, left the vaults midway through his shift, white as a sheet, claiming he'd seen a figure crouched in the corner of a sealed chamber. When he returned with others, the chamber was empty, but the dust on the floor showed footprints, bare, human, and leading nowhere. Soon, paranormal investigators began to take interest. In the 1990s, the vaults became part of ghost tours. Groups descended by candlelight to hear stories of murder, magic, and misery. But what was meant to be entertainment quickly became something else. Visitors fainted, cameras malfunctioned, and one guide swore that she saw a shadow move along the wall beside her, long and thin, like the outline of a man crawling just beyond the light. Others spoke of cold spots that felt like invisible walls of ice in the air. And in certain rooms, no sound could be heard. Not footsteps, not breathing, not even your own heartbeat. Researchers tested for natural explanations: air currents, faulty acoustics, vibrations from traffic above. But nothing matched what people experienced. It was as if the vaults themselves had memory, and when disturbed, they remembered you. Since their rediscovery, the vaults have become a bridge once more. This time between history and legend. The living walk where the dead once slept, and every visitor who descends those steps carries a part of the darkness back with them. Because what lies beneath Edinburgh was never meant to be found. It was meant to be left alone. Even after centuries of silence, some things refuse to die. The Edinburgh Vaults are open now. Tourists walk their halls by candlelight. Guides speak of ghosts and tragedy, and cameras capture the shadows that dance along the walls. But the guides all agree on one thing. There is something down there that watches back. They call it the Watcher. It began in the 1990s. Shortly after the vaults reopened for public tours, a group of visitors reported the same thing on separate nights. A tall, dark figure standing motionless in the far end of a chamber. No face, just an outline darker than the darkness itself. One woman said she felt someone brush her shoulder. When she turned, there was no one there. Moments later, her friend screamed, because she'd seen a black shape standing right behind her. It vanished when the candlelight flickered. Another guide, who worked in the vaults for over a decade, claimed she refused to enter a certain room alone. Every time she did, she heard breathing, slow, deep, rhythmic, coming from somewhere behind her. Paranormal investigators brought equipment: EMF meters, infrared cameras, digital recorders. Most of it failed in the same places. Batteries drained instantly. Audio recordings picked up strange interference, like voices speaking beneath the surface of the sound. In one recording, you can clearly hear a whisper. It says a single word: leave. But the most terrifying account came from a professional television crew in the early 2000s. They were filming a documentary about Edinburgh's haunted history. Midway through a scene inside the vaults, one cameraman felt something grab his wrist. He dropped the camera, and the footage kept rolling. When they reviewed it later, they saw a brief flash, a pale hand reaching from the darkness, its fingers impossibly long, before vanishing into the shadows. The footage never aired. Since then, countless visitors have described the same experience. A feeling of being followed, a weight pressing on the chest, and eyes, unseen but unmistakably there, watching from the far end of the corridor. The Watcher has no known origin. Some believe it's the guardian spirit the coven once summoned centuries ago, still bound to its circle, still waiting for those who disturb it. Others think it's something older, something that was always there, waiting beneath the stone long before the bridge was ever built. Whatever it is, it doesn't appear to all, only to those who stay too long or ask too many questions. Guides who have worked the vaults for years say they can tell when the Watcher is near. The air changes, the candles burn lower, and suddenly no one wants to be the last to leave the room. Even the skeptics, those who laugh at ghosts and call it folklore, go silent in that moment. Because it's one thing to hear a story, it's another to feel the dark watching you breathe. And down there beneath Edinburgh, you always feel watched. Always. Today, the Edinburgh Vaults are one of Scotland's most famous attractions. Every night, hundreds of visitors descend beneath the South Bridge to walk through the cold stone corridors, to hear stories of the poor, the damned, and the lost. The tour guides hold their lanterns high, casting long shadows on the walls, and they speak of history. But what fills those tunnels now is something far older than history. In the deepest chambers, there are rooms no guide will enter, not because of superstition, but because those who have tried have come back changed. One guide, a veteran of 20 years, once said, "Down there you don't see ghosts, you feel them." Tourists still faint in the darker rooms. Some burst into tears for no reason they can explain. Many leave with scratches on their arms or necks, thin, shallow marks that appear only after they step back into the light. And always, someone will turn at the end of the tour and swear they saw a figure standing behind the group, tall still, watching. No one ever captures it clearly on camera, only the flicker of movement, the suggestion of eyes glowing faintly in the dark. The watcher, they say, still guards the vaults, bound by the rituals of centuries past, feeding on the fear of those who dare to descend. Historians call it folklore, skeptics call it mass hysteria. But those who've been down there, those who've stood in the silence, that know better. Because there's a weight in the air that no modern world can explain, a pressure that feels almost alive, like something beneath the stone still remembers your footsteps, your breath, your name. And maybe it does. The vaults have seen everything: poverty, crime, murder, worship, and resurrection. They've swallowed men whole and kept their secrets. They are older than the laws of the city, and darker than the streets above could ever imagine. At night, when the tours are over and the gates are locked, the air down there grows still again. The candles burn low, and in the blackness between rooms you can almost hear the city above, the rumble of traffic, the laughter of strangers. But beneath it all, then if you listen closely, you'll hear another sound. Slow footsteps, moving through the empty chambers, tracing the same path they've walked for centuries. And when they stop, you'll know that the watcher has found another visitor, another name to remember. So if you ever find yourself in Edinburgh and you pass by South Bridge at night, pause for a moment. Look down toward the old archways beneath the street, because beneath your feet lies a world untouched by time, where the living once hid and the dead never truly left. And somewhere in that darkness, a whisper waits to be heard again. It's been waiting for you. Second story, the Eastern State Penitentiary, USA, the first modern prison where isolation drove inmates insane. They called it a miracle of modern reform, a place where even the most broken souls could find redemption through silence. But behind those gray walls, the silence didn't heal. It devoured. In the heart of Philadelphia stands a fortress of stone, its corridors stretching like veins beneath a dead city. Built in 1829, the Eastern State Penitentiary was once hailed as the future of criminal justice, a place where isolation would cleanse sin. No chains, no whips, only solitude. But the architects of reform didn't understand what happens to a mind that forgets the sound of its own voice. The inmates began to whisper to the walls, pray to shadows, and scream into the darkness, because the silence screamed back. Tonight we step inside the cell blocks of a prison where the light never reached, and the echoes of the condemned still linger. This is Eastern State Penitentiary, where the silence never dies. In the early 1800s, America was changing. Cities were growing, streets were crowded, and behind every alley, crime was rising like smoke from a dying fire. But while others demanded harsher punishment, one group of reformers believed they had found a better way. The Quakers, guided by faith and silence, believed that sin could be erased through penitence. They dreamed of a place where criminals would be locked away not to suffer but to reflect, to stare into their own souls until redemption came, or madness did. So in 1829, construction began on a building that would change the course of human punishment forever. Eastern State Penitentiary, a cathedral of stone and iron, designed not for worship but for isolation. Architect John Haviland was chosen to bring this dream to life. His design was unlike anything the world had ever seen. A massive complex built like a wheel, with long corridors radiating from a central hub, where guards could watch every movement without ever stepping inside. Each cell was small, narrow, and sealed off from every other prisoner. A single skylight, the Eye of God mirror, was the only window to the outside world. Every brick was meant to remind inmates that God could see them, even if no one else ever would. When the first prisoner arrived, met a man named Charles Williams, convicted of stealing a watch. He was blindfolded, chained, and led through endless corridors of cold stone until he reached his cell. The door closed, the bolts locked, and in that instant he became the first man in America to vanish completely into silence. What began as a moral experiment would soon become a nightmare, because when the only voice you hear is the echo of your own breath, it's only a matter of time before you start to answer it. From the moment the gates closed, the silence became law. In Eastern State Penitentiary, no one was allowed to speak. Not to the guards, not to the other inmates, not even to themselves. They called it the separate system. Each prisoner lived alone, ate alone, and worked alone inside their cell. The meals were passed through a small wooden slot. The daily hour of exercise took place in a private walled courtyard, where even the sun seemed hesitant to enter. If a prisoner was ever moved through the halls, a thick hood was placed over his head, so he could never see another face again. The guards walked in soft shoes, their footsteps absorbed by the stone floors. The entire prison was engineered to erase sound, to bury every human voice beneath layers of solitude. The reformers believed silence would force reflection, that the wicked would grow remorseful in the stillness of their confinement. But what they didn't understand was that silence doesn't cleanse the soul. It corrodes it. Within months, prisoners began to change. They whispered to invisible friends. They tore at their clothes, screamed into their hands, and laughed when there was nothing to laugh at. One man was found kneeling in his cell, his face turned up toward the skylight, whispering prayers in a language no one recognized. Another refused to move, convinced that the shadows in his cell were breathing with him. The guards began to avoid certain corridors, saying they could feel the eyes watching them from the cracks in the doors. The silence that was meant to bring peace had birthed something else entirely. A quiet so deep it began to whisper back. And in that endless quiet, the first screams began to echo, soft at first and then constant. The architects of the penitentiary believed that isolation would purify the soul. Instead, it broke the mind. By the 1840s, reports of madness inside Eastern State could no longer be ignored. Men who entered sane and defiant left as shells of themselves, whispering nonsense, trembling at invisible shapes, clawing at the walls until their fingers bled. Doctors began to record cases of melancholia, hysteria, and what they called religious mania. One prisoner, who had once been a calm and educated man, tore open his mattress looking for the serpent that whispered his name each night. Another spent days staring at the single beam of light from the skylight above his bed, convinced that God was speaking through it, until he tried to claw his way up the wall to meet him. There was a shoemaker who sang hymns without words for 9 hours straight, before collapsing and never speaking again. A carpenter who begged guards to nail his hands to the floor, claiming it was the only way to stop the devil from moving through his body. Guards reported hearing muffled sobbing from empty cells, and footsteps that echoed long after patrols had ended. One night, an officer swore he saw a man standing in a locked corridor, but when he reached the spot, the air was cold and the man was gone. The silence had become a living thing, pressing down on every mind, swallowing every thought. And soon even the guards began to suffer. They spoke less, slept less, and some refused to patrol the deeper cell blocks alone. The prison was working exactly as designed. But what it was creating was not repentance, it was madness. By the mid-1800s, Eastern State Penitentiary had earned a new name among its guards, the Whispering Prison. Because those who walked its halls at night claimed the walls themselves were alive. They said the stones creaked when no one moved. Doors rattled without a breeze. And from deep within the cell blocks came faint, broken voices, crying, laughing, or praying to something unseen. Some believed it was the echoes of the mad, sounds trapped in the corridors for years, bouncing endlessly through the empty air. But others, they weren't so sure. One guard, Thomas Flynn, reported hearing his own name whispered through the keyhole of an empty cell. When he opened the door, a chill rolled out, like breath from a frozen lung. Another swore that while patrolling cell block 12, a voice asked, "Do you hear them too?" He never worked another night shift again. Prisoners began carving strange marks into their walls, circles, eyes, crosses. Some drew crude faces with mouths stretched wide in silent screams. When guards demanded an explanation, they always heard the same answer: it helps keep them quiet. In 1835, a small riot broke out when an inmate claimed he saw something crawl out of the drain in his cell and whisper his name. The disturbance spread, echoing through the halls until the guards were forced to drag men from their cells one by one. just to end the panic. Even visiting clergy began to notice it. One chaplain wrote that he felt a dreadful heaviness of spirit inside the walls, as if the building itself rejected prayer. The reformers who once boasted of their miracle prison had stopped visiting altogether. They could not face what their perfect silence had become. For by then, even the most devout believers began to whisper that Eastern State was no longer a place for redemption, but a tomb for the living. Over the decades, thousands of men passed through Eastern State's gates. Some were petty thieves, others monsters, but no matter who they were, the prison broke them all the same. In 1929, a new name arrived at the gates, one that would echo through American history: Alphonse Al Capone. The most feared gangster in America, the king of Chicago's underworld, was sent to Eastern State after his arrest for carrying a concealed weapon. Yet inside these cold walls, even Capone's power meant nothing. His cell was furnished differently: a rug, a desk, even a radio. But no comfort could mask the whispers that came at night. Guards reported that Capone would sit awake, trembling, staring into the corner of his cell, shouting for someone named Jimmy. He begged for forgiveness, claiming the ghost of James Clark, one of the victims of the St. Valentine's Day massacre, was haunting him, whispering in the dark. Each night the same cries echoed down the hall. "Go away, Jimmy. Please leave me alone." Capone was released after 8 months, but those close to him said the experience never left him. He refused to sleep without lights on, and often spoke of hearing the walls breathing. But he was not the only soul claimed by the prison. There was Joseph Taylor, a thief who gouged out his own eyes, saying he saw too much in the dark. And Henry Thorpe, who refused to eat because the bread was whispering. By the early 1900s, the penitentiary was filled beyond capacity. The separate system had long collapsed, but the madness it birthed had not. Inmates screamed through the nights while guards pretended not to hear. And those who died were buried in unmarked graves in a field just beyond the walls, their names forgotten, their voices not. For even after death, many claimed the prisoners never truly left, because at Eastern State the punishment didn't end with dying, and it only got quieter. By the dawn of the 20th century, the world had changed, but inside Eastern State Penitentiary, time had stood still. The grand experiment of silence and isolation had become impossible to maintain. The prison that was once designed for 250 men now held more than 1,000. The cell blocks overflowed. The separate system, that sacred rule of solitude, collapsed beneath the weight of its own cruelty. Prisoners now shared cells meant for one. Voices returned to the corridors, but they did not bring comfort. They brought rage. Starvation, filth, and disease filled the blocks. Guards patrolled with clubs drawn, their eyes hollow from years of fear and fatigue. The once modern penitentiary had become a decaying labyrinth, a place the city of Philadelphia pretended not to see. The outside world moved on. Reformers found new causes, new philosophies. But within Eastern State's walls, the same gray despair lingered. The sound of madness had replaced the silence. By the 1930s, the prison was notorious not for redemption, but for brutality. Prisoners spoke of being chained to walls, doused in freezing water, locked in the Klondike, a pitch-black underground cell where men emerged half dead. In 1945, one guard wrote in his journal, "I believe the place is cursed." Not a week passes without blood on the floor. The reform dream was dead, and what remained was something worse, a decaying monument to human suffering. When visitors asked what the penitentiary had become, one old warden answered quietly, "A graveyard with doors." In 1971, after more than a century of confinement, the gates of Eastern State Penitentiary finally closed. The last of the prisoners were transferred, the cell doors sealed, and the great stone fortress was left to rot in silence once more. For the first time in 142 years, there were no voices inside the walls. No footsteps, no chains, only wind drifting through the broken skylights, whispering across rusted iron and dust. The city grew around it, but Eastern State remained untouched, a dark island of decay in the middle of Philadelphia. Trees sprouted through the cracked floors. Pigeons roosted in the rafters. Rain carved lines through the paint like veins on old skin. But those who dared to enter claimed it was not truly empty. Former guards, returning out of curiosity, reported hearing faint sobs in the old cell blocks. One man said he heard the echo of iron doors slamming, though every door in the prison was chained open. Urban explorers spoke of cold spots that followed them, of shadows that moved against the light. In cell block 4, a photographer captured what looked like a figure standing in the doorway. Tall, blurred, and human. But when he checked the frame before and after, it wasn't there. The police stopped investigating calls from the site. They said it was just vandals or the wind, but those who spent even a few minutes inside swore it wasn't either. One visitor described it best. It felt as though the building was breathing, and I wasn't supposed to be inside it. The prison's silence had once driven men insane. Now it kept their madness company. By the late 1970s, the city had forgotten about Eastern State Penitentiary, but the dead hadn't. The first real stories of haunting came from the few who dared to enter. Police officers, caretakers, and trespassers who walked those decaying corridors long after the lights went out. A maintenance worker named Gary Johnson was among the first to speak publicly. In 1991, while unlocking a cell door in cell block 4, he felt something seize his arm, hard and cold like a vice made of air. He said a force gripped him so tightly he couldn't move, couldn't breathe. And as he turned, he saw faces, distorted, screaming, swirling through the air around him. When it released him, he ran. He never went back. Another report came from a small group of contractors repairing a section of the roof. They swore they heard voices echoing from inside the cell block below, though the doors were sealed. One of them recorded the sound, faint, muffled, but unmistakably human. When they played it back, a whisper cut through the static. "Leave." Visitors began seeing shadows moving across the hallways, sudden flashes of light, and figures peering out from cells that hadn't held a living person in decades. The most haunted area, they said, was cell block 12, where prisoners had once been chained to the walls. There, the laughter of unseen voices echoed down the corridor. One guard described hearing a man crying softly, only to find the cell empty, the chain still swaying. Paranormal investigators began calling the prison the most haunted place in America. But to those who knew its history, it wasn't haunted. It was simply awake again. By the 1990s, word of Eastern State's hauntings had spread far beyond Philadelphia. Journalists, historians, and ghost hunters began lining up to enter the decaying fortress. And what they found inside would make the world listen. The first major investigation came in 1992, when a local paranormal team was granted overnight access. They brought cameras, recorders, and electromagnetic sensors, all the tools of modern ghost hunting. Within hours, their devices began to fail. Batteries drained, compasses spun, and in cell block 6, one of the investigators captured a sound that has never been explained. A deep, guttural moan that seemed to vibrate through the entire hallway. When they replayed the tape later, another voice could be heard underneath it. A whisper, "We're still here." In the years that followed, television crews from around the world arrived. Ghost Hunters Most Haunted, Ghost Adventures. Each brought their own technology, their own skepticism, and each left with something they couldn't explain. On one recording, a camera caught a shadow darting across a corridor, tall, thin, moving fast. The team thought it was a person, but the infrared lens showed nothing alive. Another team claimed to see a full apparition. A man dressed in tattered prison clothes pacing back and forth in cell block 12. When they called out, the figure stopped and turned its head. Even scientists who visited out of curiosity reported strange effects. Sudden headaches, nausea, dizziness, as though the air itself was charged with electricity. But what unsettled them most was not the sounds, not the shadows. It was the feeling of being watched. Every corner, every cell, every breath of the cold, dry air. One investigator said it best: Eastern State isn't haunted by the dead. It's haunted by what the living did here. Today, Eastern State Penitentiary stands as a museum, a monument to history, and a warning carved in stone. Tourists walk the same halls where men once lost their minds. Flashlights sweep over the peeling paint, the rusted bars, the empty cells that still hum with a quiet weight. Guides speak of architecture and reform, of progress and philosophy, but when the crowds leave, and the night settles in, the old silence returns. Security guards say they hear footsteps echoing through cell block 4. Doors slam. Whispers drift from the darkness as if the prisoners are still counting the hours. Some visitors have fainted after entering certain cells. Others break down in tears, claiming they felt the despair of someone still inside. Psychics describe the energy as heavy, ancient, impossible to cleanse. And perhaps that's the truth. Because Eastern State was never just a building, it was a belief. A cruel idea wrapped in stone, that silence could save the human soul. But silence here became something else. A voice, a presence. A reminder that the past does not sleep. It lingers. Every sound inside these walls, every echo, every breath, could be the wind. Or it could be the men who never stopped serving their time. The penitentiary closed its gates in 1971, but the punishment never ended. Because some prisons, you never leave. And in Eastern State, the silence still breathes. Third story. The Haunted Tower of London. The executions, betrayals, ABD superstitions. On the banks of the River Thames stands a fortress older than most nations. Its walls have watched 1,000 years of blood, betrayals, and ghosts. They say the stones remember everything, every scream, every prayer, every secret execution whispered away beneath the crown. This is no legend. This is the Tower of London, a place where history itself refuses to rest. They built it to protect a king, but it became a prison for his enemies, and sometimes for his own family. Chapter 1. The Birth of the Tower. The story begins in 1078. William the Conqueror, fresh from victory at the Battle of Hastings, ordered a fortress to be built at the heart of his new kingdom. A symbol of power, a warning to those who dared defy him. He named it the White Tower. Back then it gleamed with pale limestone imported from France. To the conquered English, it was not a fortress but a threat, a cold promise that their new ruler's gaze never left them. Over the next centuries, the tower grew, walls within walls, battlements, dungeons. Each monarch added their own touch. King Richard strengthened the gates, Henry III turned parts into royal apartments, and Edward the Pern expanded the outer curtain walls. But even then, the tower was never just a palace. From the very start, it was a place of fear. Prisoners of war, traitors, and political rivals, all brought here to vanish quietly. The walls held secrets that could never reach the outside world. By the 12th century, whispers had already begun. Guards spoke of hearing voices in the dead of night. A woman weeping near the river stairs. Footsteps in corridors long after curfew. No records explained it. But even then, the tower's reputation was growing. A fortress by day, a haunted tomb by night. Centuries later, the tower became the stage for royal executions, betrayals, and torture that defined Britain's darkest history. But from its very birth, it carried an omen. Because the first men who built it never left. Archaeologists have long noted the strange discovery. When foundations were excavated centuries later, fragments of human bone were found buried beneath the earliest stones, likely the remains of laborers who died during construction, sealed inside the walls as part of medieval superstition. They believed sacrifice strengthened the walls, but perhaps it only cursed them. To this day, night guards report hearing the clang of unseen hammers from deep within the White Tower's base. No one is ever found there. And no modern work has been done in those chambers for decades. The Tower of London was born in conquest, and its birthright was blood. Even before the first prisoner walked through its gates, the hauntings had already begun. Question time 4. Kings' names were mentioned. What are the names? Drop in the comment box. End of Chapter 1. Chapter 2. The Executions. Blood on the Stones. By the 1500s, the Tower of London was no longer just a fortress. It had become the stage for a grim tradition, a theater of death where betrayal and royal blood were put on display. Not all executions at the tower were public. Most were hidden within its walls, silent, efficient, and reserved for those whose deaths needed dignity. But the stones remember every cry, and the ghosts of those who fell here never left. On May 19, 1536, Queen Anne Boleyn, the second wife of King Henry VIII, was led through the tower grounds. She had been accused of treason, adultery, and incest, crimes she almost certainly did not commit. Her final walk was quiet. Witnesses said she carried herself with grace, repeating prayers softly as the guards escorted her to the scaffold. She asked for forgiveness for those who condemned her, saying, "I pray God save the king, for he is a good and gentle Lord." Then she knelt, and with one swift stroke from a French swordsman, her life ended. They buried her beneath the chapel of St. Peter at Vincula, beside others who fell to the same fate. But the queen did not rest. Guards through the centuries have sworn to see her ghost, a woman in a faded Tudor gown walking silently near the chapel. Sometimes she carries her head in her hands. Other times she moves without it, gliding toward the green, the air growing suddenly cold. Even soldiers trained to face death refuse to stand watch alone near that spot after midnight. Long before Anne's fall, the tower witnessed another tragedy, one darker, quieter, and forever unsolved. In 1483, two young princes, Edward V and his brother Richard, Duke of York, were placed in the tower by their uncle Richard, Duke of Gloucester. He promised it was for their safety, but within weeks both boys vanished. Their disappearance cleared Richard's path to the throne, and history branded him Richard III, the man who murdered his own nephews. For centuries, whispers filled the tower halls. Guards reported seeing two small figures hand in hand wearing white nightgowns appearing near the bloody tower staircase. They do not speak, they only look up, eyes one wide, faces pale, and then fade into the stones. In 1674, renovation workers found the skeletal remains of two children beneath a stairwell. They were quietly buried in Westminster Abbey. But even now, many believe the princes never left the place where they died. In 1554, another royal walked the Tower Green. Lady Jane Grey, England's 9 days queen. Only 16 years old, she was crowned against her will after King Edward VI's death. But her rule lasted just over a week before Mary Tudor took back the throne. Jane was imprisoned within the tower. Witnesses say she spent her final days reading scripture and writing farewell letters to her family. On February 12th, she was brought to the scaffold. She spoke calmly, asking God for mercy, then blindfolded herself and whispered, "Lord, into thy hands I commend my spirit." After the blade fell, silence lingered across the Tower Green. That silence has never truly gone. Modern visitors report seeing a pale woman drifting near the execution site, her lips moving silently as though praying. And every February morning, just before sunrise, guards hear footsteps pacing the green, followed by a single sigh, and then nothing. The tower's walls drank more royal blood than any other place in England. Some say it's the reason ravens still circle above the grounds, guardians of the souls who remain. For every name carved in history, there are countless others forgotten. Servants, prisoners, guards, each one leaving behind an echo, a breath, a flicker of memory. The stones are heavy with it. When night falls and the tourists are gone, the tower breathes again, and the whispers of the condemned rise through the cold London air. Question time. Who was the last royal killed in the tower in 1554? End of Chapter 2. Chapter 3. Royal Betrayals and Ghosts. In the Tower of London, loyalty was a word written in blood. Every royal betrayal echoed through these walls, and even centuries later, their ghosts still walk here, trapped between crown and curse. The ghost of Henry VI. On the night of May 21st, 1471, King Henry VI prayed alone inside the Wakefield Tower. He had lost everything. The Wars of the Roses had crushed his reign, and Edward IV had reclaimed the throne. That night, soldiers entered his chamber. He was murdered as he knelt in prayer, stabbed through the heart, his blood staining the stone floor. When the guards found his body, his expression was described as peaceful, but his presence never left. For centuries, yeoman warders, the tower guards, have reported the same scene repeating every May 21st at midnight. A flicker of light in the Wakefield Tower. Then a figure appears. A tall man in robes, head bowed, lips moving silently in prayer. And when the bell strikes 12, he vanishes. Many say it is Henry VI, forever reliving his final moment, still praying for a peace his kingdom never gave him. The death of Margaret Pole, 1541. The tower has witnessed countless executions, but few as brutal as that of Margaret Pole, the Countess of Salisbury. At 67 years old, she was accused of treason by Henry VIII, her only crime being the mother of the king's enemy. She was led to the scaffold on May 27, 1541. When she refused to kneel, the executioner panicked. His blade struck her shoulder, not her neck. She screamed, running in circles as he hacked at her again and again. 10 blows before she fell. Her body was buried beneath the chapel, but her soul remained restless. Witnesses through the 19th century claimed to see her ghost running across the green, reenacting her desperate attempt to flee death. Her gray dress torn, her mouth open in a silent scream. Even today, warders refuse to patrol that section of the green alone after dark. The betrayal of Anne Boleyn's cousin, Catherine Howard, 1542. Just 6 years after Anne Boleyn's death, her cousin Catherine Howard met the same fate. She too became queen, and she too was condemned for adultery. On the morning of her execution, she broke free from her guards, running down the hallway now known as the Haunted Gallery. She screamed for mercy, begging to speak to King Henry one last time. The guards caught her before she reached the door. Moments later, she was beheaded on the same spot as her cousin. Since then, the Haunted Gallery has lived up to its name. Guards report hearing running footsteps, a woman's voice crying out, and cold air that moves against the wind. Visitors have fainted there. Others swear they've heard the whisper, "Henry, forgive me." 4. The tower as a royal prison. They called it Traitor's Gate, the water entrance through which prisoners of the crown were brought. Once the gate closed behind them, few ever saw the outside world again. Elizabeth I entered those gates herself in 1554, accused of treason by her sister Queen Mary. For weeks she awaited her fate in the same cold rooms that had held so many condemned before her. When a guard came to summon her, she believed it was the end. But the order was for her release. Elizabeth survived and became queen. She never forgot the tower. In her later years, she avoided even looking toward it from her palace windows. And to this day, her ghost is said to appear briefly near the Traitor's Gate. A pale light reflected on the water, then gone. Royalty and ruin were born side by side within these walls. The Tower of London was built to protect the crown, but instead it devoured it. The screams of kings and queens, of traitors and innocents still hum beneath the stone. And when the night wind passes through the courtyard, it carries with it the quiet sound of history, a reminder that the tower does not forget its own. Question time. Whose death terrified you the most? End of Chapter 3. Chapter 4. The torture chambers beneath the Tower of London lies a place few were ever meant to see. Cold stone iron restraints, a silence so thick it feels alive. They called it the Lower Wakefield Chamber, but history remembers it by another name: the torture room. In the torture room are 1. The rack. The king's question. The most feared of all was the rack, a wooden frame with turning wheels that pulled a prisoner's body apart. Invented in the medieval period, it became the crown's favorite instrument during the 16th century, used to extract truth from those accused of treason. One of its victims was Guy Fawkes, the man behind the gunpowder plot of 1605. He was brought to the Tower after being captured beneath Parliament. When questioned by King James's men, Fawkes refused to reveal his accomplices, so they turned the wheel. At first he screamed, then he went silent. His arms were pulled from their sockets, his joints dislocated. The next time he signed his confession, his signature was barely a jagged mark. His hands were too destroyed to write. That paper still exists today. You can see it in the National Archives, a trembling signature that still tells the truth better than words. The scavenger's daughter. The rack stretched the body, but the scavenger's daughter crushed it. Invented under Henry VIII by Sir Leonard Skeffington, it folded a prisoner into an impossible position, head between the knees, limbs bound tight until blood poured from the nose and ears. It was considered merciful because it ended faster. One of the few recorded victims was Thomas Maya, an Irishman accused of rebellion. When released, he carved his name into the tower wall. Thomas Maya, which lieth here, was accused of things he never did. That carving still remains. You can touch it. Stone etched by trembling, bleeding hands. For the man in the iron cage, John Gerard's escape. But not every prisoner broke. In 1597, Father John Gerard, a Jesuit priest, was imprisoned in the Salt Tower for aiding Catholics during Elizabeth I's reign. He was tortured on the rack for days, but never betrayed his allies. When his captors grew weary, they chained him in an iron cage, suspended from the wall, left hanging in pain for hours at a time. Yet he survived and escaped. Using a rope smuggled in by friends, Gerard slid down the tower wall one night into the Thames, his hands still torn from torture. He vanished into the fog and fled England. To this day, no one knows how he survived that fall. Silence beneath the stone. In truth, only a few were ever tortured at the tower, but their screams carved a legend. To this day, guards report hearing the sound of chains dragging at night or a single voice whispering in the cold air below the White Tower. During one restoration in the 1970s, Workers found iron rings embedded in the walls, some still stained with what appeared to be blood. Experts say it was rust. The warders who found it don't believe that. The kings who ordered these tortures are long dead. The prisoners who endured them are dust. But in the tower's depths, the air still remembers pain. It lingers there, beneath every stone, beneath every whisper. And when night falls, it breathes again. Question time. Of the tools in the chamber, which is more scary to you? End of Chapter 4. Chapter 5. The Ravens and the Curse. Every fortress has its legend. Every crown has its curse. For the Tower of London, that curse is carried on black wings. They say as long as the ravens never leave the tower, England will stand. But if they ever fly away, the monarchy will fall and blood will return to these stones. It sounds like superstition, but history has tested it before. 1. The legend begins. The legend began in the 17th century, during the reign of King Charles II. The royal astronomer John Flamsteed complained that ravens nesting on the White Tower were interfering with his work. He asked the king to remove them. Charles agreed. But before the order could be carried out, an old courtier warned him, "If the ravens leave the tower, the crown will fall." The king hesitated. He ordered that at least 6 ravens must always remain. From that day, the tower's fate was tied to the birds, half guardian, half omen. No one laughed at the superstition again, because only a few years later, Charles was overthrown, beheaded, and the tower's ravens, according to records, vanished during the chaos of the English Civil War. When the monarchy was restored, Charles's brother James II made sure ravens were brought back. He said, "Let them guard both crown and kingdom," and they have never been allowed to leave since. To the Great Storm of 1881. In 1881, a violent storm swept through London. When the skies cleared, guards discovered that the tower's ravens had been killed, every one of them. Days later, tragedy struck. That same year, a fire broke out in the tower's barracks, destroying much of the structure. The newspapers recalled the prophecy. The ravens are gone and the tower burns. The crown ordered new birds immediately. Superstition or not, the rule remained unbroken ever since. World War II. The ravens depart again during the Second World War. The Blitz pounded London night after night. The ravens grew restless, terrified by the bombing. One by one, they disappeared or were killed. By 1941, only a single raven remained, and a bird named Grip. Then, in the darkest days of the war, even Grip was gone. Moments later, the tower was hit by another bomb. It didn't destroy the fortress, but it tore through nearby buildings. Prime Minister Winston Churchill himself gave the order. The ravens must be restored immediately. Within days, new birds arrived, and when they settled, the Blitz finally began to ease. The Raven Masters vigil today. The ravens still live inside the tower walls, watched over by a dedicated guardian known as the Raven Master. Each bird has a name, a clipped wing to prevent it from flying too far, and a history of its own. Some say they're just birds. Others swear they understand things no human can. There's one account from 1968. A raven named Grog disappeared overnight. Days later, a fire broke out in the Queen's residence at Windsor. Coincidence or warning? The Raven Master won't say, but he keeps a careful count every morning. 4. The curse of departure legends say that if the ravens ever leave for good, the White Tower will crumble, the monarchy will collapse, and the Thames itself will rise to swallow London. Scholars call it myth, but every Raven Master keeps the same oath, to protect the birds, and in doing so, to protect the kingdom. Because in a place as old as this, some legends aren't born of imagination, but memory. The tower has seen kings rise and fall, wars rage and end, but the ravens remain. And when they stare out across the gray Thames at dusk, their eyes reflect every soul that once passed through these gates. In their silence lies the story of England itself, dark, patient, and always watching. Question time. Do you believe in the superstition 1 of the Raven end of Chapter 5? Chapter 6. The Tower's Modern Hauntings. For almost 1,000 years, the Tower of London has stood, a monument to power and punishment. But the past never truly leaves these walls, and those who guard it today still speak of whispers, footsteps, and unseen eyes watching from the dark. This is no longer medieval legend. This is now the White Lady of the Tower. Visitors to the White Tower have long reported a faint floral scent. Roses, drifting through the corridors where no flowers grow. Then a figure appears, A woman in white, her face hidden, walking silently along the staircases before fading into the walls. The first written record of her haunting comes from the late 19th century. A guard on night patrol claimed she touched his shoulder. He turned and saw only a shimmer of white fabric before collapsing unconscious. When they found him the next morning, his eyes were open, his hand still raised as if fending something off. The ghost of Anne Boleyn. Of all the tower's ghosts, none is more famous or more tragic than Queen Anne Boleyn, the second wife of Henry VIII, executed here on May 19, 1536. Her spirit is said to wander Tower Green, head held calmly beneath one arm. In 1933, a soldier on duty near the Chapel Royal fainted after witnessing a woman in Tudor dress glide past him, her eyes fixed on nothing, her gown trailing behind her like smoke. When he awoke, his rifle was found beside him, but the gate behind him had never been opened. Even today, warders say that on quiet nights you can hear faint weeping near the chapel, as if the Queen still waits for forgiveness. The Two Princes, the Bloody Tower. The most haunting story of all belongs to Prince Edward and Prince Richard, the two young sons of King Edward IV, who vanished inside the tower in 1483. Their uncle, Richard III, took the throne. The boys were never seen again. Centuries later, in 1674, workers digging near the White Tower discovered a wooden chest. Inside were the bones of two children buried beneath the stairs. Since then, the Bloody Tower has never been quiet. Guards report hearing laughter, footsteps running through locked rooms, and once a voice whispering, "Please, let us out." The soldier at Traitor's Gate. In the 1970s, a yeoman warder patrolling near Traitor's Gate saw what he thought was a fellow guard, a man in armor standing beside the water, watching the tide. He called out, but the figure didn't move. When he approached, the armored man turned slowly, revealing a hollow face beneath the helmet. The warder fled, and when he returned with others, there were only wet footprints leading into the river, and then nothing. The modern recordings in 2003, a motion sensor in the tower's museum triggered after hours. When guards reviewed the CCTV, they saw a tall figure dressed in black Tudor robes crossing the corridor. No one had entered or exited. Infrared confirmed no living person was there. Experts blamed dust, but those who work the night shift know better. Some say the figure was Thomas Becket, the murdered archbishop whose ghost once appeared here in the 13th century, striking down part of a wall built in his name. Others say it was one of the condemned, still pacing the halls waiting for dawn that never comes. The Tower of London stands as one of history's greatest fortresses, but it is also a graveyard of time. Every brick remembers, every gust of wind carries a whisper of the condemned. Tourists come and go by day, but when the gates close and the true residents awaken, the kings, the prisoners, the betrayed, and their voices rise softly through the stone, a warning to those who forget what power costs. Question time. Which modern haunting of the tower fascinates or terrifies you most? End of Chapter 6. The Tower of London has watched nearly 1,000 years of history unfold. It has seen kings crowned and kings destroyed, truth twisted into torture, and silence broken by the screams of the forgotten. Its stones have tasted royal blood. Its walls have swallowed confessions whispered in fear, and its shadows, they still move even when no one walks there. Some say the tower is haunted. Others say it's simply history refusing to die. But listen closely and you'll understand. The two are not so different. Every night the gates close and London sleeps. But inside these walls the tower never truly rests. The past still walks here, in armor, in chains, in whispers and wings. And if you ever visit after dark, stand still and listen, because the Tower of London is still alive. History never dies, it only waits to be heard. Horror Diaries, if you made it this far, then you've heard the echoes of the tower. But this is only one of the many places where history refuses to rest. There are darker stories waiting, true stories hidden behind walls and beneath graves forgotten by time. So if you crave more true horror, subscribe to Horror Diaries. Turn on your notifications and join me as we walk through the shadows of the past, one true story at a time.